Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When we bought 12 quiet acres in the Carolina foothills, I expected coffee on the porch, not a siege. But the HOA next door had other plans, and my retired general of a grandfather wasn't about to surrender. What followed was less neighborly chat, more covert campaign. I'd always imagined our first morning in the new place would be quiet, maybe even a little idyllic. Birds in the pines, coffee on the porch, my daughter running around with the dog, while my wife directed where each box should go. We'd closed on this 12-acre spread in the foothills of North Carolina only 2 weeks ago, and today was the day we finally brought our lives here. By mid-morning, the gravel drive was lined with our vehicles, a rented moving truck, and a stack of boxes that still smelled like the cardboard store. My grandfather, retired General Richard Reeves, stood near the front gate like he was commanding a base perimeter, arms folded, sunglasses on, scanning everything that moved. At 72, he still had that ramrod posture and an air that made people instinctively straighten up when they approached. I was bent over a box of tools when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel from the county road. I looked up to see a shiny white SUV with the words Maple Ridge Estates on the door glide to a stop just outside the gate. Behind it, a dark sedan idled, two people in matching polo shirts with clipboards visible through the windshield. Bringing up the rear, a county sheriff's cruiser. I glanced at Grandpa. He just tilted his head toward the gate, the kind of signal that meant, "Pay attention, son." The SUV door opened, and out stepped a woman in a pastel blazer, her blonde bob stiff in the light breeze. She walked like she'd practiced for a courtroom entrance. "Good morning," she called brightly, as if she were about to sell me a timeshare. "I'm Karen Lindley, president of the Maple Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. Congratulations on your new home. We just need to get some paperwork squared away so we can welcome you into the community." I wiped my hands on my jeans and met her halfway down the drive. "Appreciate the sentiment," I said, "but we're not in Maple Ridge. This property is outside the HOA. She gave a practiced little laugh, the kind meant to suggest I was adorably misinformed. "Oh, all properties within our community boundaries are subject to our covenants. You're on our map, so we'll need your signature on the membership agreement today. Monthly dues are $300, payable by auto debit, and..." She glanced at the sedan. "We'll need to arrange for the removal of those unapproved structures, the garage and the shed, I mean. They're not in keeping with our aesthetic standards." The two from the sedan had gotten out now, each with a clipboard and an air of officiousness. One was already jotting something down while staring at the shed like it was a biohazard. Karen stepped closer. "We'll also need a spare set of keys to the gate and the house for our compliance inspections. Don't worry, we only do surprise checks once a quarter." I actually laughed at that, but there was no humor in it. "Yeah, that's not going to happen. This land isn't in your jurisdiction." Her smile stiffened. "Mr. Reeves, refusing to comply with an official HOA directive can result in fines and..." Grandpa's voice cut through like a drill instructor on parade day. "Ma'am, step over here." He was already walking toward the sheriff's deputy, a man who'd been leaning against his cruiser watching the exchange with a neutral expression. Grandpa popped open a weathered leather folio on the hood of my truck and spread out a large county map, an official plat, and a printed excerpt from the property registry. "This," he said, tapping the shaded parcel, "is our land. See the survey date? See the boundary line? That's the HOA's edge. This road, tap, is a private easement recorded in the deed. No shared maintenance, no covenants, no annexation. This property predates your development by 45 years. The deputy bent over the documents, nodding slowly. Karen came over, still holding her notice like it was a warrant. "Officer, I'm telling you, our community standards apply. This man..." The deputy straightened up. "This is a civil matter, ma'am. I can't enforce HOA bylaws on land that isn't in your HOA. Looks like his paperwork checks out." Karen's voice sharpened. "Then I want him arrested for refusing a lawful order to comply with code enforcement." "No code enforcement here," the deputy said evenly. "Not unless the county says so." She stood there for a moment, nostrils flaring, then slapped the folded violation notice onto my fence post. "Consider yourself served. You have 30 days to comply or face further action." They left in a little convoy, dust hanging in the sunlight. Grandpa didn't waste a second. He walked to the gate, took a photo of the notice with his phone, then took shots of all the departing license plates. "From now on," he said, "everything gets logged. Date, time, what was said, who was here, redundant backups. He scrolled on his phone, bringing up the feed from the motion-activated cameras we'd installed 2 days earlier. Cloud storage is live. We'll keep copies off-site too. We went back to work unloading boxes, but the mood had shifted. My wife kept glancing toward the road, and my daughter stuck close to the porch instead of exploring the yard. The general moved around the property perimeter like he was inspecting a forward operating base. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees, the gate was locked, the cameras checked, and every scrap of that so-called violation notice was preserved in evidence. We'd been here less than a day, and already the war drums were sounding. By the time the sun had gone down on that first day, I figured maybe we'd bought ourselves some peace for at least a few weeks. The notice Karen had left was sitting in our evidence folder, the gate was locked with a heavy-duty padlock, and the general had triple-checked the camera feeds before turning in. I was wrong to think the storm would wait. It was about 9:30 that night when the familiar sweep of headlights came up the drive again. This time it was another sheriff's cruiser, lights flashing low, no siren. I stepped out onto the porch in jeans and a hoodie, Grandpa already behind me, wearing the same expression he'd had back when a lieutenant tried to brief him with bad intel. 2 deputies stepped out. One I didn't recognize. The other was a younger guy who looked like he was still figuring out how to fill his duty belt. "Evening, Mr. Reeves," the older one said. "We got a call about possible illegal weapons storage and gunfire on the property." I almost laughed. Gunfire? We've been unpacking furniture. The general didn't waste time with sarcasm. "Come with me, officers." He led them into the den where my gun safe sat bolted to the floor, punched in the code, and swung the heavy door open. Inside, every rifle, shotgun, and pistol was locked in racks. Bolts open, tags visible. He laid out our North Carolina firearm owner IDs and the federal paperwork for the couple of pieces that required it. All legal, all registered, all secure. The younger deputy glanced around like he half expected to see a stack of RPGs in the corner. The older one just nodded, jotting something in his notebook. "We'll file this as unfounded. Sorry to trouble you." "Second unfounded call in 12 hours, Grandpa said, just loud enough to stick. You might want to check the number it came from before it gets someone charged with abusing 911. They promised to make a note of it and left. I was still shaking my head when Grandpa started printing fresh, private property, no trespassing, audio and video surveillance signs on his laptop. "They're testing the perimeter," he said. "We make it more expensive every time they try." I was halfway through screwing one of the new signs into a fence post when a motion alert buzzed my phone. One of the driveway cameras had picked up a pair of headlights stopping at the gate. The clip showed a dark SUV idling for a moment, then pulling away. No one got out, but tire tracks the next morning showed they'd rolled right up to the chain. The morning's mail brought something else, a glossy packet with "Welcome New Member" splashed across the front in gold letters. Inside was a direct debit form, a thick community standards booklet, and a letter from President Karen Lindley scheduling an HOA landscaping crew to address non-compliant vegetation later in the week. The letter ended with, "Failure to permit access will result in fines and further enforcement measures." I called the number on the letter. A chipper secretary answered, transferred me to legal, which went straight to voicemail. I left a message stating, for the record, that our property was not part of Maple Ridge Estates and that any further contact should be made in writing to my attorney. The attorney part was premature. We hadn't hired one yet, but it sounded better than "leave us the hell alone." That night, just as we were locking up, another set of lights came down the road and slowed in front of our gate. 10 minutes later, the county's non-emergency line rang on my cell. A dispatcher said they'd received a call about screams for help from our address. The responding deputies found nothing but a quiet house, an annoyed general, and a golden retriever that wagged at them like they were delivering pizza. Grandpa made sure to get the responding officers' names, badge numbers, and the official call log case numbers before they left. He printed the screenshots and filed them. "They want to see if we'll get rattled," he said. "They're going to find out we log every move they make." We went to bed with the gate locked, the driveway under motion sensors, and a growing folder of unfounded reports that were starting to look less like coincidence and more like a campaign. I woke before sunrise to the quiet that had sold me on this place. A pale fog over the pasture, pines layered like a dark quilt, and a gravel lane that looked like it could roll straight into a postcard. Coffee in one hand, toolbox in the other, I headed for the gate to check the trail cam cards like the general had drilled into me on night 1. From 20 yards out, I knew something was wrong. The chain sagged in a way chains do not sag when they are whole, and the padlock lay in the weeds like a dead beetle. Next to it, 2 cleanly bitten halves of hardened steel glinted in the gray light. Whoever came in had not picked the lock. They had eaten it. The rest of the scene snapped into focus in the way of job sites and crime scenes. A white pickup sat 10 yards inside the gate with the Maple Ridge logo magneted to the door. 2 men in polo shirts and cargo shorts were bracing a metal signpost, while a third, wearing a bright vest that implied authority without proving any, sighted along the top with a level like he was raising a flag on a conquered hill. The sign itself, still wrapped in plastic, read in thick block letters, "Private HOA property, members only." Behind them, a second vehicle idled with a trailer full of orange cones, rolls of caution tape, and the kind of aluminum clipboard that makes people feel like they own whatever they are standing on. I stood there long enough to let the anger boil down to something usable. Then I called the general. He answered on the first ring with a single word. "Report." "Gate's been cut," I said. "HOA truck inside. 3 men installing signage. Do not engage. Recording? Always. Good. Hold your position." He arrived in less than a minute, not so much walking as moving in a straight line with a radio in one hand and a little body camera clipped to his chest, the same one he had pulled from a drawer and called Standard Kit in a tone that brooked no debate. He nodded at my coffee. "Finish that, then follow my lead." We closed the distance together. The man with the level looked over and tried on a customer service smile. "Morning, gentlemen. We'll be done in a jiffy. New membership signage per directive." The general didn't raise his voice. He did not need to. "You are trespassing on private property. Step away from that sign. Hands where I can see them." The effect was immediate and almost comical. The 2 bracing the post shuffled back as if pulled by invisible rope. The vest looked down at his level and then at the general, recalculating his life choices. "We're with compliance," he said, tapping a lanyard badge that might as well have read, "I printed this at home." "We have authority from the association." "You have authority on association land," the general said. "This is not that land. You cut my lock. You entered without permission. You will place your tools on the ground, and you will wait for the sheriff. Do you understand me?" One of them found his backbone and tried to wedge it under his words. "We have a work order," he said, waving a piece of paper that had more clip art than credibility. "We're allowed to post notice and measure. The board voted. It's all in compliance." "Son," the general said, not unkindly, "whatever you have in your hand is not the law. The law is on the way." He keyed his radio, called the county dispatch by name. He had taken the time to memorize it, and calmly reported an unlawful entry, property damage to the lock, and the presence of 3 individuals identifying themselves as HOA enforcement. While he talked, I pulled my phone and zoomed the camera onto the bolt cutter marks on the padlock halves, onto the tread pattern in the gravel, onto the badge lanyards and the sign's printed text. My hands were steady in the way they get when the choice is between calm and stupidity. They did not bolt. That surprised me. They did, however, try to salvage the moment by pretending to measure things. One man took out a laser measure and pointed the red dot at my garage, then at the shed, mumbling numbers and the words setback and non-compliant like an incantation. I filmed it all. The sheriff's Tahoe came up the lane a few minutes later, gravel ticking off the undercarriage. The same older deputy from the night before stepped out, along with a second officer with a clipboard of his own. Theirs looked real. The deputy's eyes went straight to the cut lock. The general handed him a small plastic evidence bag with the padlock halves inside, already labeled with time, date, and GPS coordinates. He also handed over a thumb drive with the gate camera clip that clearly showed a truck idling at pre-dawn and a figure leaning over the chain with something the size of a small alligator in his hands. The deputy turned to the trio. "You folks want to tell me why you're on this property?" "We're here to post association signage and verify structures for compliance," the vest said, smoothing his shirt. "We have jurisdiction under the covenants." The deputy glanced at the general's map that he had spread once again on the nearest flat surface, which happened to be the hood of my tractor. "No, you do not. And even if you did, cutting a lock gets you a trespass citation at minimum. You got permission to be here?" "Verbal authorization from the president," one of them said. "And there's a map." The deputy cut him off with a look that had ended better arguments. Verbal authorization from someone without authority is a long walk to nowhere. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to take that sign out of the hole you put it in. You're going to load every piece of your equipment back onto your truck. You're going to wait for me to write this up. And if I see you come back through that gate without a court order, you're going to see the inside of my booking room. Are we clear? They were clear. The sign came back out of the ground with a noise like a sucked breath. The trailer ramp squealed. The cones went back into their little plastic hive. While they worked, the general spoke quietly to the deputy, handing over the printed log he had kept since day one. License plates, dates, times, names, and the alleged violations that had appeared like mushrooms after rain. The deputy read, shook his head once, and said he would file a formal warning to the association and flag the address for increased patrols. That was when Karen arrived, tires whispering on gravel, pastel blazer bright even in the flat morning light. She got out with a folder under her arm and the particular confidence of a person who believes the world will conform if she speaks in complete sentences. Officer, she called, we have a right to enforce our standards. This man is in violation. We will be proceeding with fines and— Ma'am, the deputy said, and there was no warmth in it. Step back from the line. You are not on your property. You do not have jurisdiction here. Your men cut a lock. That is a crime. I'm issuing a trespass warning. You bring anyone else out here without a court order, you will be cited or arrested depending on what you do to get in. She opened the folder like she could fan him into agreement. We have updated maps from the county showing annexation. The board approved. Maps are not recorded changes, the general said, and I could hear the patience fray just a little. Recording office has no such annexation. Put it on paper and file it, or stop wasting everyone's time. She glared at him like he had tracked mud onto a white rug. Then she looked past him at me, the way one looks at a nail that refuses to go flush. You're making this harder than it needs to be, she said. Members cooperate. Communities cooperate. People who dig in cost themselves money. Then I guess we'll budget, I said. The deputy finished his notes, handed the vest a yellow copy of the trespass warning, and pointed toward the gate. The HOA truck and trailer eased out, sign rattling in its metal cradle like a defeated standard. Karen lingered long enough to promise further action in a voice that had stopped convincing anyone of anything at least a decade ago, then followed them out, a little plume of dust trailing entitlement up the county road. We did not go back to bed. The general set up a folding table just inside the gate and called it a checkpoint with a straight face. He taped a fresh legal pad to the tabletop for entries, laid out a small battery pack for phones, and positioned a camera high enough to catch plates and faces of anyone who stopped. He walked the fence line with me, and we measured for a heavier brace and a new hasp that would cover the lock like armor. He ordered a contact sensor for the gate that would text us if it moved more than an inch without the code. He called our neighbor on the next parcel over, a cattleman who had already introduced himself with a jar of pickles and the look of a man who did not love committees, and asked if he was willing to be a witness if more foolishness arrived. The cattleman said he would, and then he said a word about committees that made me like him even more. By late morning, the sun had burned the fog away, and everything looked normal again. But the chain on the gate was thicker, the new lock heavier, and the notebook on the table already had a first page full of names, times, and badge numbers. It felt less like we lived behind a fence and more like we had drawn a line. We ate breakfast late on the porch. My daughter finally chased the dog into the yard, and my wife finally exhaled in a way that sounded like someone who had been holding her breath since a pastel blazer had rolled up uninvited. The general sat with his coffee and watched the road the way a man watches the horizon at sea, as if things announce themselves long before they arrive if you learn how to see them. When he finally stood, he said only, "We made it cost them something today." I nodded, slid the evidence bag with the murdered lock into the folder, and went to work replacing the hasp. The morning had started quiet. It was not going to stay that way. By the end of that week, I thought maybe the dust had settled. The general didn't share my optimism. He'd been in enough campaigns to know that when the shooting stops, it's usually because someone's reloading. He was right. Monday morning, a plain white envelope arrived by certified mail, addressed to me in the neat, almost artificial penmanship that screamed paralegal with too much time. Inside was a notice of inclusion from the County Land Records Office, informing me that my 12-acre parcel had been administratively incorporated into the Maple Ridge Estates HOA per owner consent filed on record. Owner consent. I stared at the signature on the attached consent form. It was my name, in a font that was supposed to look like my hand, but had all the warmth of a ransom note. I have signed thousands of documents in my life. This wasn't one of them. I didn't even have to say anything. Grandpa had already read it over my shoulder. Forgery, he said flatly, then picked up the phone and dialed a number from memory. Dan, it's Reeves. Yeah, I'm back in North Carolina. Got a forged county filing here. You still at the prosecutor's office? Good. I'll send it over in 10 minutes. Dan, as it turned out, was a former military prosecutor who owed the general at least one favor from a long-ago base closure fight. Within the hour, he had looped in a county investigator and told us to gather every scrap of paper related to the property. I drove straight to the title company where we'd closed the purchase, folder under my arm, and asked for the original deed packet. The closer, a no-nonsense woman named Gail, pulled the file, flipped through, and confirmed what I already knew. No HOA covenants, no annexation clauses, no rider with any Maple Ridge on it. While she made certified copies, the general was busy. He cross-referenced the so-called updated county map Karen had waved around at the gate with the actual GIS records on the county website. There was no update, no ordinance, no plat change filed. The map, in the notice of inclusion, was a photocopy with our parcel shaded in marker. Sloppy work for someone who thought they were playing in the big leagues. That afternoon, we got another visitor, a guy in khakis and a badge on his belt that said Property Compliance Inspector. He tried to serve me a schedule of initial fines for unapproved accessory structures and vegetation violations. The paper listed totals in the thousands, payable to Maple Ridge Estates HOA. When I asked which court had authorized the fines, he said, the board approved them. Grandpa stepped up then, and his voice took on that parade ground precision that leaves no room for misunderstanding. Sir, you are attempting to collect money on a forged legal claim. You will leave this property immediately, or you will remain here until the sheriff arrests you for fraud. The man didn't even argue. He backed down the driveway like it was a live minefield. The general wrote down his name and plate, took a photo of the badge, and added it to the growing evidence log. That night, over dinner, we strategized. The general wanted to take the fight right to the courthouse, file a complaint, and get ahead of whatever Karen was building. I agreed, but we also knew she'd keep pushing through other channels. She's going to try to get the county on her side, I said. If she can't force us in, she'll bury us in inspections, code enforcement, whatever her friends can throw. We didn't have to wait long. Wednesday morning, a county zoning review team showed up. 3 people with clipboards, measuring tape, and a form that looked suspiciously like it had been drafted by someone who spent a lot of time reading HOA bylaws. They claimed they were there for a routine survey, but when pressed, admitted they'd been asked by a council member to verify compliance issues. Grandpa invited them to wait at the gate while he called the zoning department director, who he happened to know from a veterans charity board. 10 minutes later, their boss was on speakerphone, apologizing for the confusion and ordering them off our property. They left quickly, but not before one of them muttered something about Maple Ridge wanting this handled quietly. By now, the pattern was undeniable. Karen was pulling in favors. She had reach, and she was using it. That evening, Dan, the prosecutor friend, came by in person. He laid out what we were dealing with. Forged filings, attempted fraud, potential conspiracy with public officials. This is bigger than a neighborhood squabble, he said. If we document it right, it's a felony case. The general already had the documentation in military-grade order, copies of every false notice, screenshots of every motion alert, timestamps, witness statements from the cattleman neighbor, even a chain of custody for the cut padlock. Dan flipped through it and smiled for the first time all day. This, he said, is how you win. We agreed on the next move. File a formal criminal complaint with the sheriff, backed by Dan's legal summary, and let the paper trail start choking the life out of whatever Karen was plotting. Grandpa looked almost pleased as he set the alarm that night. They wanted a fight, he said. Now they're going to get a campaign. By Friday, we'd already filed the criminal complaint, but the general wasn't done. He believed in what he called offensive reconnaissance, drawing the enemy out where you could see them. That's how Operation Bait took shape. The plan was simple on paper and absolutely infuriating to the type of person who needs control. We placed a fake classified ad in the local paper and on a small real estate listing site. It advertised the upcoming private sale of a 10-acre parcel adjacent to Maple Ridge Estates. No HOA restrictions, negotiable pricing. The location we used was a piece of woodland the general's friend owned a few miles away, but we tweaked the language so it sounded like it sat right next to my property. The hook was in the details. Property suitable for subdivision, existing access easement, and, just to make Karen salivate, owner considering inclusion in HOA for the right buyer. Within 48 hours, the fake number we'd set up for inquiries was buzzing. Most were tire kickers or retirees, but one call stood out, a woman introducing herself as acting on behalf of the Maple Ridge Board. She wanted to meet before any outside offers complicated things. We played polite, set a meeting for Monday at a diner off Highway 17, and sent in the buyer, a buddy of Dan's who could pass for a mid-level developer and had a knack for keeping people talking. Monday morning, the general and I sat in my truck across the street from the diner, listening through a concealed mic in the buyer's shirt collar. Karen showed up with two of her compliance officers in tow, a thick manila folder under her arm. She wasted no time, offered an exclusive transaction if the buyer agreed to process the paperwork through their HOA attorney, which she said would include adjusting boundaries to consolidate the parcel with existing HOA lands. The buyer played along, asking how that would work without the current owner's consent. Karen said the magic words. "It's easier than you think. We've done it before. The county trusts our filings. All it takes is the right wording and the right signature on the right form." We caught all of it, every word, on 2 audio sources and 1 tiny camera hidden in a pen clipped to the buyer's shirt pocket. She even slid a draft boundary adjustment form across the table with blank signature lines ready for forging. After the meeting, we handed the footage straight to Dan. His eyes lit up like Christmas came early. "This isn't just forgery," he said. "It's conspiracy to commit fraud across state lines. If that buyer had been real, that means federal jurisdiction." The general leaned back in his chair. "Good. Let's get the big guns." By midweek, the FBI field office in Raleigh had a copy of the recordings. An agent named Whitaker called me personally, asking for every related document, every false filing, every piece of footage we'd captured. We gave him a stack so thick it could be used as a doorstop. He said the words you rarely hear in real life. "This is exactly the kind of thing we like to prosecute." Karen, of course, didn't know any of this. She thought she'd just recruited another willing mark. The very next day, one of her officers showed up at my gate again, pretending to be lost but clearly casing the place. The general let him ramble about community standards for 3 minutes before reminding him he was on camera on private property and that the sheriff's warning still stood. The man left, but not before glancing at the reinforced chain like it was a personal insult. That night, I realized how far we'd come from day one. The fight wasn't about whether they'd try something. It was about how many laws they'd break before they ran out of room. And thanks to the general's idea, we now had them breaking those laws on tape. The general summed it up perfectly over coffee. "We've stopped defending the gate," he said. "Now we're inside their walls." By the time the FBI was in the loop, the atmosphere around the property felt different. It wasn't just harassment anymore. It was a siege in slow motion. The general knew it too. He kept the cameras rolling and the logs updated, but now his focus shifted to tightening the net. 2 days after the diner meeting, the first real break came from Agent Whitaker. He called to say that they'd cross-checked the forged consent form from the county with previous filings from Maple Ridge Estates. 3 other property owners in the area, none of them actual HOA members, had similar documents in their files, all with signatures they swore they never wrote. 2 were elderly, 1 had recently passed away. Whitaker didn't say it outright, but I could hear it in his voice. This was bigger than Karen harassing me. This was a pattern. That same afternoon, the county sheriff himself came down our driveway. No deputies, no entourage, just him in uniform but without the sunglasses and swagger. He walked into the kitchen, took off his hat, and said, "We've got federal interest now. You might see some unfamiliar vehicles in the area. They're with us." Then he pulled a folded sheet from his breast pocket. A formal trespass notice with Karen Lindley's name at the top, signed and notarized, prohibiting her and any Maple Ridge agent from setting foot on my property. The general pinned it to the inside of the front door like a trophy. "Let's see if she can read," he muttered. Apparently not, because 2 mornings later, we woke to the sound of tires crunching over gravel. I checked the monitor and saw a white SUV with HOA decals halfway up the drive. Two men in polo shirts were unloading laminated private HOA property, no trespassing signs from the back. They'd even brought a post hole digger. Grandpa didn't even put on his jacket. He stepped outside, radio in hand, and barked into it with the kind of command presence that makes even armed men pause. Unit approaching. Stand by to apprehend. He wasn't bluffing. The sheriff's cruiser was already idling at the end of the drive, just out of sight. The two men froze, exchanged a glance, then started loading the signs back into the SUV. By the time the deputy rolled up, they were mumbling about miscommunication and following orders. The deputy wasn't amused. He took their IDs, issued a written warning for trespass, and told them they'd be arrested if they returned. One of them glanced at the general like he wanted to say something, but thought better of it. Meanwhile, Whitaker's team was moving fast. They'd pulled phone records showing multiple calls between Karen and two members of the county board in the days before my inclusion notice was filed. The timing matched the sudden wave of zoning inspections we'd been hit with. It was the kind of paper trail that screamed quid pro quo, and Whitaker said as much. By Thursday, the investigation had teeth. The feds had subpoenaed Maple Ridge's internal records, and word in town was that at least one board member had been seen leaving the HOA office with a banker's box and a very pale face. Dan came by that evening with an update. They're looking at wire fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. If they push hard, that's 20 years for each major count. Karen, oblivious or desperate, doubled down. Late that night, motion alerts showed someone trying to pry open the mailbox at the gate. We'd reinforced it with a locking steel insert after the first week of nonsense, so all they managed was to set off the tamper alarm. By the time I reached the gate, the taillights of a dark sedan were vanishing into the tree line. The general's response was to up the ante again. He called in 2 favors from his old unit, and by the weekend, we had a pair of discreet security consultants, former MPs, watching the property from unmarked vehicles. It's not paranoia, he said, if they've already tried to breach the perimeter twice in 1 week. I believed him. Because now it wasn't just about holding the line, it was about tightening it until Karen and her allies couldn't move without stepping straight into a charge sheet. By the time the second week rolled over, the situation had stopped feeling like a neighbor dispute and started feeling like a military operation. Only this time, we were on home turf, and the general had every advantage. The FBI's presence was quiet but constant. I'd spot an unfamiliar SUV idling down the road, or a sedan with government plates tucked behind the gas station near the highway. Whitaker called it low-profile observation. The general called it the calm before the strike. On Tuesday morning, that strike came closer. Whitaker asked us to be ready in case Maple Ridge made another move. His team had set up what he called intercept capacity. Sure enough, before lunch, a black pickup with a ladder rack rolled up to the gate. 2 men in reflective vests hopped out and claimed they were county code contractors there to assess violations for abatement. No work order, no identification beyond laminated cards with the HOA logo stamped on the corner. We didn't even have to stall them. Within 3 minutes, a federal sedan slid up behind them, 2 agents stepping out with badges in hand. The agents asked 3 questions: names, employer, authorization, and the men crumbled. One admitted they were told to make the property look non-compliant so the county could force a corrective process. The agents took statements right there by the gate while the general stood on the porch, arms folded, looking like a man watching. An enemy convoy surrender. That night, Whitaker came by in person. He was done gathering. Now it was time to move. The U.S. Attorney's office had greenlit a joint state-federal action, multiple arrest warrants, search warrants for the HOA office, and subpoenas for the 2 county board members who'd been trading calls with Karen. "We'll need you both here when it happens," he said. "She's going to try something last minute." She did. Friday morning, just as the first light hit the treetops, motion alerts flared on every camera. A convoy, Karen's silver Lexus at the lead, followed by 2 HOA trucks and, unbelievably, a marked county cruiser, rolled right up to the gate. This time, she wasn't pretending. She had a folder in one hand, megaphone in the other, and she was shouting before she was even out of the car. "You are in violation. Open this gate or face immediate legal seizure of property." The general didn't bother with the radio. He opened the front door, stepped out onto the porch, and waited. The moment Karen spotted him, she pointed like she was commanding troops and ordered the cruiser forward. But before it could move, a black Suburban cut in, sirens wailing. 4 agents and FBI windbreakers poured out, flanking the cruiser and boxing in the HOA trucks. Whitaker strode up to Karen, his badge open in one hand, a thick sheaf of papers in the other. His voice was calm but carried across the clearing. "Karen Lindley, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, filing false instruments, forgery, and attempted extortion." She tried to wave the folder like a shield, but one of the agents took it, slid it into an evidence bag, and cuffed her before she could finish her protest. 2 of her board members were arrested on the spot. The county cruiser's deputy looked like he wanted to sink into the ground. Within minutes, he was giving a statement to another agent. 1 HOA truck was impounded. The other was towed after they found a stack of pre-printed notices of HOA authority in the back seat, complete with forged signatures on the bottom line. By noon, the property was quiet again. The Suburbans and cruisers were gone, taking Karen, her allies, and boxes of seized files with them. The general stood by the gate, the trespass notice still pinned in place, and watched the dust settle. He didn't smile, but his eyes had that glint I'd seen in the diner sting, satisfaction, tempered by the knowledge that a campaign isn't over until every enemy asset is accounted for. By the following week, the headlines were everywhere. Local TV, regional papers, even a segment on one of those national small-town crime programs. The footage of Karen being led away in cuffs, face twisted somewhere between disbelief and fury, played on repeat. They'd frozen her accounts, seized her Lexus, and shut down the Maple Ridge Estates HOA office pending a full audit. For the first time since we'd moved in, the air around the property felt clean. Whitaker called on Tuesday to confirm the charges. 18 felony counts for Karen, including conspiracy, wire fraud, forgery, and abuse of authority under state statute. Each of the arrested board members faced 10 counts of their own. The 2 county officials were indicted on bribery and misconduct, their political careers dead before they could start spinning excuses. The general, of course, treated the whole thing like the debrief after a successful deployment. He sat at the kitchen table, maps and printouts spread like battle plans, marking each incident that had built the case. "Chain of evidence held," he said. "No room for appeals on procedural grounds." That's how you finish a fight. We'd thought that was the end of it, but there was still the matter of the HOA itself. The state attorney general's office filed a petition to dissolve Maple Ridge Estates entirely, citing systemic corruption and unlawful encroachment on non-member property. A month later, the court granted it. Their assets, real estate, bank accounts, even that shiny sign at their gated entrance, were liquidated to fund restitution payments to victims. We got a check in the mail for damages and legal costs. The general framed the envelope before we cashed it. With the storm finally past, we decided to throw a different kind of gathering. We called it an open gate day. No formal invitations, just a sign by the road and a post on the community board. Neighbors welcome. No HOA membership required. Folks came with lawn chairs, coolers, kids running barefoot through the grass. The general grilled burgers like he'd been born at a barbecue pit, while I gave tours of the land to anyone curious about the trails and the little creek in the back. I noticed something as the sun dipped behind the pines. The people who stayed late weren't just here for the food. They were here because they'd seen what happened when someone stood their ground, and it made them feel like maybe they could do the same if push came to shove. A retired schoolteacher told me she'd been harassed for years over a shed the HOA didn't like. A young couple said they were thinking about buying in a non-HOA neighborhood for the first time. The general didn't give a speech. He just raised a glass of iced tea at the end of the night and said, "Property rights aren't given. They're defended." It was short, but it stuck. When the last car pulled away and the gate was locked for the night, I stood in the quiet, feeling the weight of the past weeks finally lift. We hadn't just won against Karen. We'd burned her whole operation to the ground and salted the earth behind it. And in doing so, we'd sent a message louder than any HOA megaphone. Some gates aren't meant to be opened by force.